Britain is standing on a knife's edge. The economy is straining, public frustration is rising, and the political class, those meant to steer the nation, seem to exist in a parallel universe entirely of their own making. And then, right when the country needed clarity the most, the Prime Minister delivered a message so baffling, so wildly out of step with the national mood, that many wondered whether the nation's leaders had simply forgotten who they serve. If that sounds unbelievable, stay with me because this story is only getting started. Britain in 2025 is not a nation short on problems. The economy is squeezed to the point of fracture. NHS waiting lists stretch further than most people's patience. Families are juggling impossible choices, deciding whether to heat their homes or put food on the table, sometimes unable to do either. Against this backdrop of genuine suffering and mounting anxiety, the last thing anyone expected was what happened next. Because while parents across the country sit awake at 2 a.m. calculating bills, while pensioners skip meals to save a few pounds, and while workers count every hour of overtime just to hold their heads above water, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, decided the nation urgently needed to hear about his emotional struggles watching a Netflix documentary with his son. Yes, in the middle of everything collapsing around ordinary people, the leader of the United Kingdom took to camera to share the deep personal challenge of processing his feelings while watching television. This is leadership? The disconnect was immediate, sharp, and almost painful to watch. It was the kind of moment that didn't just miss the mark, it missed the entire stadium. And worse, it played into a growing sense that the people guiding this country have lost the ability or the willingness to understand what Britons are living through every single day. And if you're already shaking your head, you're not alone. But hold on, because it gets far more brutal. Enter Nana Akua of GB News, a presenter known for speaking plainly, sometimes savagely, but always in a way that cuts through political noise like a knife through fabric. What she delivered in this segment wasn't a policy critique. It wasn't a gentle probing of leadership decisions. It was a cinematic, no-mercy demolition of Starmer's entire public image, one that has now echoed across the country. Akua began by saying she saw something online that she genuinely thought had to be fake. A joke. A meme. Maybe an AI-generated clip, because in 2025, it's almost impossible to tell the difference anymore. Deepfakes blur reality. Satire sounds like news. And actual political decisions sometimes resemble satire more than governance. But this wasn't satire. It was real. This was the actual Prime Minister of the United Kingdom stepping forward, not to address the economic crisis, not to speak about the NHS or broken supply chains or the worsening cost of living crisis, but to discuss how emotionally challenging it was for him to watch a show with his child. And it raised one unavoidable question. If this is the hardest thing in Keir Starmer's life right now, what world is he living in? Because it's clearly not the same one the rest of the country occupies. Midsection CTA number 1. If you're already stunned by the level of disconnect here, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next, because this story only gets harsher from here. Akua didn't stop at questioning Starmer's emotional confessions. She accused him of something even more cutting, using his own son as a political prop. A tool to appear relatable in a moment when his approval ratings were falling faster than the pound on a bad trading day. And she might have a point, because the reality is simple. When a politician's popularity sinks low enough to scrape the bottom of the political barrel, they get desperate. They reach for the oldest trick in the book, the relatability card. Talk about the kids. Talk about family. Talk about the emotional struggles of everyday life. Try to remind the nation, I'm just like you. But he isn't. Not in the way that matters. Because while millions are lying awake wondering if they can afford their next rent payment, the Prime Minister is offering thoughtful reflections on teenage developmental programming on a streaming service. While families skip meals to keep the lights on, he is giving his view on Netflix content. The gap isn't just big, it's staggering. And yet, Akua had only just begun. She pulled up footage, one clip that has now been replayed over and over across social media, of Keir Starmer physically tripping at a public event. It should have been a harmless moment, a brief misstep, the kind of thing anyone could do. But Akua weaponized it instantly, comparing him to Joe Biden and his notorious feud with staircases. The comparison was ruthless and effective. Look, physical coordination shouldn't determine political competence. No one is arguing that. But optics matter. And when your public approval rating is already lower than a forgotten bucket in a school basement, the last thing you want to do is stumble, literally, in front of cameras. Because every trip becomes a meme. Every misstep becomes evidence. Every second of that footage becomes another reason for voters to ask, is this really the best we've got? If you want more brutally honest breakdowns like this, go ahead and subscribe. You'll want to follow every part of this unfolding political storm. And then came the line that detonated across the country, like a political firecracker. The moment that turned the segment from commentary into legend. Nana Acua looked straight into the camera and delivered 7 words that captured a nation's frustration more perfectly than any pollster or strategist ever could. Keir Starmer is about as popular as a bucket of sick. A bucket of sick. It was disgusting, unforgettable, and devastatingly precise. A phrase no one could unhear. A metaphor now permanently welded to the Prime Minister's public identity. But Acua hadn't even reached the political carnage yet. This was only the beginning.